Hello everyone, welcome to session 3, and in today's session we're going to do some fun details like painting the eye and doing more details in the ears, so let's go ahead and get started. So what I'm doing here next is I'm going to use this watercolor pencil. It's a gray watercolor pencil, and I'm going to use it to lightly sketch in more details in the ear so I can see what the heck I'm doing when I'm painting. I don't want to lose all this beautiful softness, so I'm going to try to carefully paint around a lot of it and just put in a few little details just to add a little bit more realism, but I want to be really delicate with that because I don't want to paint over some of these really pretty passages where the paint basically painted itself, where we were using really thick cream consistency paint on that glistening paper. I just love how this ear looks, but I want to add a little bit more detail to up the realism just a little bit. So I'm using this watercolor pencil, something new I've been doing. And I found when I used a watercolor pencil in the cloud painting of Edisto, some of the watercolor pencil didn't really dissolve. So don't push too hard with your watercolor pencil, and it probably totally depends on the quality of the brand. I was using Faber-Castell, and those aren't the greatest watercolor pencils. Maybe that had something to do with it. But just kind of play with your watercolor pencils first and see how much they will actually dissolve as you get them wet. The ones that I used didn't dissolve as much as I thought they would in that Edisto painting. So I'm kind of on the fence of making a tutorial about the Edisto rainbow painting. So if you guys really want it, let me know. And if I hear from enough of you, I will make it a tutorial, but otherwise, no. All right, so I am just adding more details with my pencil just so I can see the main shapes that I want to paint. Getting my silver black velvet size 8 round wet over there, getting some aureolin and naphthol red. Those of you who have been with me long enough know that's just what's on my palette when I reach for those colors. You know it's going to be Holbein aureolin and naphthol, M-gram naphthol red. This is a tea consistency mix on dry paper, so everything's dry, everything is set, the paint is set. So when you paint over dried paint like this, it will not move unless there was really thick cream consistency applications like some of this was. So that's why, another reason why the silver black velvets are nice to paint with in this situation, because they are really soft and they are less likely to move thick layers of paint. When you paint with cream consistency paint and then let it set, if you go over that and paint over that, sometimes the paint will move. If that cream consistency paint had been really thick and you paint with especially granulating or earth color pigments that are really heavy, sometimes those will reactivate and move a little bit on you. So just know that. But for the most part, you can paint over watercolor that has set and dried. So now I've got really thick cream consistency. I'm just adding a little bit more structure to the ear, looking closely at my reference photo and just kind of following that and following my pencil lines. So of course, the thicker your paint, the less water in it, the darker your paint will be. I'm just trying to get some more furry looking marks in there. Now, if you're happy with your ear, the first go around you want to just keep it fresh, that's fine. If you want a little bit more realism, you can add some furs with a wet on dry approach, like what I'm using here, where the individual furs kind of show. I'm really trying to be delicate with this. I don't want to paint over too much of it. So there I went in with some clear water and just softened some of the edges there. I'm going in with clear water and just softening some of what I just put in. I don't want too many hard edges there, and I don't want this ear, even though it has that screaming red in it, I don't want it to be completely the main place of attention for the viewer. I want them to really look at that eye too, so I want to keep it pretty soft. And because we painted this so wet and wet, your painting will need something, your painting may need something different than what I'm doing. So you might need a lot more darkening if you didn't use as cream consistency paint as what I used. All right, I'm gonna get this ear a little bit darker overall. So I'm adding some clear water everywhere. So I let the ear dry after that last painting session. We just did it in this tutorial session 3, and I let it completely dry because I'm going over this with clear water now to get it ready to receive some even darker paint. And over there on my palette, I'm activating some dried paint on my palette to get this really thick, really thick cream consistency mix of burnt sienna, Winsor violet, and ultramarine blue. So that's a really dark brown, like a chocolate brown color. So again, I let those paint colors dry on my palette, and then I can just touch them with a damp brush, and voila, I have cream consistency paint in my brush. And now I'm applying that very thick paint gingerly to the most dark areas of the ear to really pop out those darks, really get the darks dark. And I'm trying to keep those furry bits at the bottom third of the ear very light, so I'm not touching those. I'm wringing out my brush over there, getting it wet, getting it clean, and getting some cream consistency paint on my brush there. I want to define this part of the ear a little bit better. I like how it has that little upside down V that goes up into the ear and kind of defines the ear there. So I got in that bit of anatomy. Now I'm using the push technique where I'm just dropping in bits of clear waters to hopefully try to push up into this and make little fur texture hairs. That's my goal. We'll see if that happens. You can also pick some paint up like this, and it's pretty dry, and then drop in a bit of clear water right there where you made it lighter, and then just let it dry after that. So going in and sopping up some water actually to clean up and make it even lighter, and then I'm going in with fresh, clean, little tiny drips of water as this dries. Now I'm sopping that up and then putting a new little drop in this little area to just kind of keep working at it, and hopefully it'll push technique its way to beauty. paint you can get, which I have a good bit on my palette right now because I sprayed my paint and activated it. I'm going to drop in some nice cream consistency paint. And then clean it off on my palette and save it and squeeze it out of my brush. So I just squeezed a bunch of cream consistency paint back on my palette, and that'll save that paint for another session. All right, while that's drying, we can work on this ear a little bit. And let's start out with using very pure color. So I'm going to get some Naphthol red mixed up. Rinse out my brush, and then I'm going to pick up some pure yellow. Actually, this is a little dirty, so clean that out. And pick up some pretty clean yellow. Squeeze that in. Mix it up. We've got a nice pretty orange ear color now. All right, and now I'm going to pre-wet this whole ear. And I've got a little bit of orange in my brush, so you can really see what I'm doing, so that's good. And my window is very hot, so I've got to work really fast. That might be even an advantage. Look at how that red diffuses. It's so pretty. It's really striking. Now I'm going to get some very thick burnt sienna to dab in, and I'm kind of dabbing so it does explode off my brush. For these edges that have some burnt sienna in them. And there's a little bit of burnt sienna here and there in the ear. All right. Sorry, my stupid table's so wobbly. This is already completely dry here. I'm gonna drop in some water, as clean as I can get it. I'm gonna go to my clean water way over here and just allow this to push technique, because actually this is going to be a dark flap coming over here, and then we can kind of push technique some furs here, I think. I think that'll be pretty. And then just let that dry and do what it wants. So when I say push technique, I'm dropping in little clear bits of water. And this is almost dry. It's so hot in this window. Let's see if I can push any of it more. I don't think so. It's all pretty wet, or all pretty dry. I printed out a lighter picture of the eye here because this one's really dark and I couldn't see the contours in it. So I'm going to put a little first bit of blue because it's got some blue in this eye. Which segues into some nice burnt sienna, so I'm going to get some burnt sienna milk consistency pretty much. And I'm going to let the edges of the blue and burnt sienna melt into each other. Now I'm just reshaping this eye a little bit to make it a little bit higher up and down vertically than it is wide across. I had the shape a little bit wrong there. So I'm looking very carefully at my reference photo and just doing a little bit of reshaping here. And a lot of this is going to have very dark paint on it, so it can just serve as a map and an underpainting. And I'm putting in that little top of the eyelid there to kind of map out where that goes, and just getting the basic anatomy painted in with milk consistency paint on perfectly dry paper here. You can tell it's dry paper because everything has hard edges, nothing is blooming out softly. And using just a mix of burnt sienna and maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue, getting some more cream consistency paint now to put in some of the darker eyeliner. And you want to try to look at the shapes in the eye to get them correct. Like there's that big diagonal shape across the top half of the eye that I kind of used as a map. But I'm also kind of making up a few things just to make the eye look more glistening than the reference photo. And also I want you to remember when you're painting an eye, you want to think in terms of the values you're using. You want to make sure at the end of the painting you have lights, mediums, and darks in your eye. That's very important to have a really alive, glistening looking eye. I'm using just the tip of my brush to get some of this eyeliner in and kind of map that in. Getting some of the pupil in, making a few things up. I should have made that bottom of that a little bit more diagonal. It's kind of going straight across, and straight across lines are not as interesting as diagonal lines, and the reference photo is more diagonal looking, so I'm not sure if I'll fix that or not, but just a little tiny tidbit of thing that I would do a little different right there. Getting more cream consistency paint on my brush. You notice when I'm working with cream consistency, I have no water in the heel of my brush. If I do, I squeeze it out, and then if I need to get a little bit of water in my brush, I'll just dip the very tip of my brush in the water and then pick up my cream consistency paint. And here I'm wanting to get really dark marks, so that's why I'm working with cream consistency paint. The thicker your paint, the darker your mark is going to be. And like I said earlier, I am going to paint over a lot of that blue. That blue is just going to be a little glint in the eye, basically. So most of that blue is going to get covered up, like I just covered up a bunch of it. Now I'm using clear water to get the main body of the fawn wet, and her cheek and the side of her neck. And I'm just going to get everything wet because I'm going to add another layer of color onto her coat. And I'm going to make it a lot more red leaning to kind of really push the colors in her coat. And I made a mistake right there. I covered up, see there, I'm picking up the water with my paper towel there because I want that area on the left side of her neck completely white because the sun is hitting it. So that's why I picked that water back up. I realized that I made a mistake, and I'm getting the whole right side of the fawn wet basically. And now I can go in with my cream consistency, and there I've got very red orange there, and putting in a pretty strong color. You might want to dull yours down a little bit. That's up to you. The thing with watercolor is you can paint brightly and you can always dull it down. But if you paint with dull colors, you can't brighten them back up. So I was kind of pushing this painting with brighter orange in her fur than in the reference photo, because I figured if it gets too bright, I can just put a glaze of, say, blue or purple over it and calm it down later. So I was just taking that chance just to make this more of a wow painting. And I think I do like how it came out. And remember, your color will dull down as it dries, so you want to use a little bit more exciting color than what you want, because it will dull down anyway. That's just something watercolor does. It's called the drying shift, when it gets lighter and duller as it dries. So I'm just putting big passages of orange throughout the side of her face and on top of her face to add a glaze of color. Being careful to look at my reference photo and paint the paint color right up to the whiter eyeliner. And you can see I'm painting on moist paper here because it's just all, each brush stroke is kind of just softly merging into everything else. And here I'm kind of just blocking out the chin, running a brush over those harder edges to kind of soften them with clear water. Now I'm getting some really bold red and some yellow for some really bold orange in my brush. I'm really going to take it even a step further here and put a few swishes here and there to really push this color. And I was being a little experimental, like I was saying. You might want to use duller colors, which would mean you use more burnt sienna. Thank you so much for joining me for session 3, and in session 4, we'll continue to develop the details and we will start doing the background. So I'll see you then.